Hello, everyone, and welcome to the March 2021 Integration Down Under. Let's go ahead and get started. Our organizers are Martin, Dan, Renee, Wagner, and myself, Bill Chesnut. And let's get on to tonight's talk. Tonight's talk is by Dan Probert, and he's going to be talking about the BizTalk Migrator in a fair bit of detail. So this will be a really good one. So over to you, Dan.
Awesome. Can you see that?
Yep.
Excellent. Okay. Hi guys. I'm Dan Probert. I'm joining you from the UK today. Quick little shout out that I like the little logo here that Bill's come up with for Integration Down Under, but being a Kiwi, I think it should be more like that. We're going to talk today about running and debugging scenarios with the BizTalk Migrator. And I'm not sure how many people have watched any of my previous talks on the BizTalk Migrator or saw Dan Toomey's overview at the Integration Bootcamp or my deep dive. But just to get everyone on the same page, I'll run through a bit of an introduction on it, and then we'll dig into some more advanced details on it, and then we'll jump over to Azure and show you it running. But this is hopefully more of a Q&A session as well. So if you've got questions, ping them to Bill, or if you've got questions and you're watching this on a live recording, sorry, on a pre-recorded after the fact, then we'll work out a way to get questions through to Bill or myself as well. Alrighty, so about me. I wrote a tool back in Azure since 2008. I started off doing Azure BizTalk services, if any of you remember those, so WABs and MABs. And then I was working with Logic Apps when it first came out, or before it was called Logic Apps, private preview in 2014. And I started work on some early migration tooling in 2015, which interestingly was looking at migrating BizTalk to workflow services at the time before Logic Apps had sort of matured. And I've been working alongside Microsoft in testing and using the BizTalk Migrator since the first preview came out, which is way before they announced it. Right, so what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, an overview of the tool. I'll keep it as short as possible. What it does and doesn't do, basic concepts. A lot of this has been covered in previous presentations, but just in case anyone here is not too familiar with the tool, we'll bring you up to speed with it. Understanding the output, things you may not know. We'll talk a little bit about performance, and then we'll jump into some demos. So I'm going to demo the FTP pass-through scenario, which comes with the tool. And then also I'm going to demo the file adapter, although I'll probably do it with FTP again, but I'll show you how you can modify the configuration to bring in, say, a flat file processing as well. And then we'll just talk a little bit about how you debug it as it's running through and where you find errors and all the rest. Alrighty. So what is the BizTalk Migrator? It's Microsoft's open source tool to automate or to help you automate the migration of BizTalk to Azure Integration Services. The source code is freely available, github.com/azure/aim tool. There are 5 repos. Aim tool is where you find the core tooling, which includes the runtime. It's a CLI-based tool. So when it runs, it's got plugins that do all the work. And those plugins are in different repos. So there's AIM tool, there's AIM core, which is the core libraries. There's AIM model, which is used to build up an in-memory model. Then there's AIM BizTalk, which holds all the code to do with understanding and parsing BizTalk artifacts. And then there's AIM Azure, which holds all the code to output the Azure artifacts as well. It's installed via a package manager known as Chocolatey, although there's work underway to look at using Windows Package Manager now. It's supports third-party repositories. So you install it. Once you've installed Chocolatey, you do choco install BizTalk Migrator. It's still in a pre-release. So it's 0.51 or 5.2 is about to be released, I think. So you've got to put -- pre. The tool currently takes in a BizTalk MSI. So if you go to the console and you export an MSI, that's what the tool takes in. It can take in multiple MSIs. So if your application is split across multiple MSIs, so say you've got a core MSI with schemas in it, and then you've got your actual application, you can supply both of them. Or you could supply all your MSIs. You could export your entire BizTalk estate and run it through the tool. And when it runs, it will generate a report outlining what's in those MSIs and what can be converted. It will generate ARM templates and Azure CLI scripts for those converted resources. And it also generates a set of scripts that will deploy everything or tear down everything. There's some prereqs in order to run the deployment scripts, as in you need the Azure CLI and things like that. And I'll talk about that in a second, or later on anyway. The fact that it takes in MSIs is interesting in that it can obviously only parse what's in the MSI, and BizTalk doesn't put everything in an MSI. So certain things aren't included. Business rules engine stuff isn't in there. What else is in there? SSO config's not in there. It's just anything that BizTalk can find in the MSI. And there was talk about having the tool be able to read from a BizTalk server, and that's a definite possibility as well, but it would mean that the tool would need to be running either on a production or test server, or from a server that has the ability to connect to the BizTalk management database. But that would be, in theory, a possibility as well. And I quite like the idea of being able to run it from Visual Studio, so you could run it from your source code and generate. So what does it handle so far? The list isn't as big as I'd like to see it, but it's still pretty good. It handles 3 adapters out of the box, so file, FTP, and HTTP. It does the XML receive and transmit pipelines. It handles, in terms of custom pipeline components or custom pipelines, it does the JSON decoder, JSON encoder, and the flat file decoder pipeline components. So if you have a custom pipeline, if you've got a custom pipeline using one of those 3 components, it will convert it and emit the equivalent up in Azure. It also handles simple orchestrations. So it handles, receive ports, send ports, construct messages, transforms. It doesn't handle anything beyond that, although it will actually convert most of what's in your orchestration. And during, I think it was in the Global Integration Bootcamp, I might have showed an example of that, or maybe on the Microsoft BizTalk live session we did. I showed what happened if you took a realistic orchestration, because it does actually bring through, like your expression shapes, it brings them through as inline JavaScript code and just comments it all out. So there is work you have to do, but at least you get the outline of everything there and you get all the subscriptions set up. However, it doesn't handle BAM, Business Rules Engine, or SSO, mainly for the reason is that there isn't a direct equivalent for those in Azure. There's talk ongoing inside Microsoft about how support for those could be brought in. SSO, a lot of people use that as a config store, and we've got Azure App Configuration, so in theory that could be migrated across. BAM's an interesting one. I mean, technically you could take all the code and put it into Azure SQL and just replicate what you've got. However, Azure has different ways of doing that. We've got App Insights and Azure Monitor and things like that. So it might be better to rewrite that. So I think Microsoft would be keen to find out from the community what direction they should take it in. Business Rules Engine's a more interesting one, mainly because it's a custom rules engine. And it would be a case of either finding an open source one or Microsoft to host the Business Rules Engine components in Azure, and there are licensing implications for that because it's licensed as part of BizTalk. Anyway, I think if there's enough demand, Microsoft will do something with it. The WCF adapters. So none of the WCF adapters are supported, although the work I've been doing, I can see how we would handle sort of basic HTTP and web HTTP. So I imagine those might not be too far off. SQL, SFTP, and SOAP. I had a session that I did with one of our partners over here where we actually wrote an SFTP connector for this tooling and added it in. So it's not difficult to add support for these things, and especially if there is an inbuilt connector in Azure for it. So MQ or SAP or something like that. In theory, it's not that difficult to add support for, as long as the the adapter properties and BizTalk are supported in Azure. Complex orchestrations aren't supported, expressions and correlation sets and, an atomic scope, for example. There's no equivalent of that in Azure. And then batching, debatching envelopes aren't yet supported, although there's work to look at that. One of the main things here, though, is that Microsoft have released this as open source because they really do want the community involved, although it's quite a complex tool. And I think people are waiting to see what Microsoft do with it before they get involved. But we've definitely been working with Microsoft with some of our clients and writing additions to the tooling. So some basic concepts around the tool. One of the first things to understand is what it does is it takes your BizTalk application and breaks it down to common enterprise patterns. And then it implements those enterprise patterns in Azure. which is why you'll find certain things get called different names. So for example, an orchestration is called a process manager because that's the pattern an orchestration is actually implementing. So in Azure, you'll find that your orchestration is now called a process manager instead of an orchestration. And that happens all over the place for various patterns. But the various bits and pieces that make up the deployed solution, you've got a message bus, and this is where you have the core components used for any integration solution, even if it wasn't BizTalk. And that's inside its own resource group. And then there's a system application resource group, and that's got BizTalk specific components. So you've got the equivalent of a message box there using service bus. And then your pipeline components, your JSON encoder and decoder and flat file decoder, and the equivalent of your XML receive pipeline components. They're all inside the system application. Now, interestingly, you could actually deploy the tool and just have the message bus and system application and use this to write your own integration scenario. You don't have to convert from BizTalk, although at the moment, obviously, you need an MSI to generate the output, but you don't actually have to convert from BizTalk. The idea is that these give you a toolkit for building integration applications in Azure, similar to the ESB toolkit gives you in BizTalk. A scenario. So a scenario is a unique path through the application. So for example, going from a file adapter to the message box, that's a complete transaction, if you like, and that's a scenario. Going from the message box back out to an adapter is another scenario. Or maybe going from message box to message box, for example, an orchestration. So those things are scenarios, and they're important when we start looking at configuration and routing slips. Configuration are the values specific to a scenario. And within configuration, it's broken down by what we call the intermediaries, which are the bits that make up your scenario. So as an example, FTP pass-through would be going from the FTP receive adapter, and then there'd be a bit of promotion of properties, and then it would be publishing your message into the message box. Those are three things that BizTalk does for you under the covers generally. And each of those three needs some configuration. So with the FTP receive adapter, we need to know what's the name of it, what's the name of the adapter, and what's its unique ID, and what are some of the properties for the adapter. And then content promotion, we need to know, are there any additional properties we need to promote? And then topic publishing, where are we publishing things to? So all that sort of thing gets held in configuration. A routing slip is part of a pattern, a routing, there's what's called a routing slip router pattern that's implemented. And the routing slip is a list of where you are going. So if you're in BizTalk and you've set up a receive location using the FTP receive adapter, and you have a pipeline that you've created, and in that pipeline, say you're using the flat file decoder, and then you're going to the XML disassembler, and then the XML validator, and then they get to, and then you're going through, say, a transform. You've got a map on the receive port. That's actually a route, because you're going from the adapter to the flat file decoder, to the XML disassembler, to the XML validator, and then to the map, and then to the message box. You just don't see it that way in BizTalk, but implementing it in the tool, that's known as a routing slip. That's the information in the routing slip is saying, I want to start here, and here's where I want to go. And if you change the routing slip, it changes how your message is processed. Just like in BizTalk, if you go into your receive location and change the pipeline, you can change the properties in the pipelines. You can say, well, actually now, instead of using the pass-through, I want to use the XML receive. And immediately BizTalk starts doing that. The same thing happens here in the tooling. If you change the routing slip, once you've deployed everything, it will change the path. In fact, you get greater control using a routing slip than you do with BizTalk. You can add in or remove the flat file decoder, at runtime if you want to. Routing properties are to do with promoted properties. So for any given message, you want to promote properties into context. And in BizTalk, you are either creating a property schema. So you're saying, these are the properties I want to promote, and they're either coming, they're either a message based, so they're coming from the message, or they're context based, and I'm just going to set them either in a pipeline component or an orchestration or something. And then there are additional properties that BizTalk sets. You might remember in BizTalk, if you're setting up a filter and a send port or an orchestration, there's a whole list of namespaced properties out of the box. So all of those will get promoted in various cases. So there's a whole lot that go with the FTP or file adapters, for example. And the way that the tool works is it looks at your property schemas that you have and builds a routing property config, which says these are the properties I want to promote out of the message and into context. A subscription, oh, there's a spelling mistake there, wasn't that? So obviously this is to do with service bus. So when you create a filter in BizTalk, that's a subscription, it's pub sub. So subscribing to messages from the message box, we're either starting a scenario or handling a request response situation, yeah? So if you think about the FTP adapter, we pick up a file and we publish it to the message box, which is a service bus topic, and then we need a subscription to subscribe to that, which is either driven from a send port or an orchestration. So there'll be a subscription that then kicks off that scenario. And the other place subscriptions are used is in a request response scenario. So if you think about using say the HTTP adapter in request response, so you send through something and it goes through a pipeline and then gets published to the message box. And then maybe you have an orchestration processing. And then the orchestration sends back a response, and you need to correlate that response back to the FTP receive adapter. And BizTalk does that for you automatically. And it's done using some context properties. And the same thing happens with the tooling here. It's just that it's not built into AIS, to Azure Integration Services. It's got to be done through Logic App work and using service bus sessions. So what happens is that when you're in a request response scenario and the Logic App has published the message to the message box, it then kicks off another Logic App, which is in a loop waiting for the response. And it will wait for a response or timeout. And once it gets a response correlating on the same unique ID, then it processes that. And that's the way it brings it back into the original Logic App. I don't know if you guys have ever done a lot of development in Logic Apps, handling a situation where you publish a message to service bus, and then you want the response to come back into your instance and trying to handle that as well. So it's trying to solve that problem. Checkpoints is a pattern which we'll show when we look at the Logic Apps. And it's a way of simplifying Logic Apps and allowing us to resume into the Logic App at the same point that we were. So although Logic Apps does this, there's in the runtime, it can resume at the point dehydrated. BizTalk does this for you with persistence points. And a checkpoint is effectively implementing something like that. So if you get to a certain point within a Logic App, and you dehydrate at that point, then when you resume, you skip over everything that's already run and you go straight to the point at which you dehydrated. Checkpoints have a secondary function, which is that they simplify building a Logic App from code, in that instead of having, I'll show that it's easier to show in a diagram or in reality, but if you build a Logic App where you've got an action and then a child action, then a child action, a child action, they all collapse up into one. And that can be, when you've collapsed them, it's difficult to see what your Logic App is doing because you have to expand everything out. Checkpoints allow you to bring everything up to the top level and say, this is a set of actions I want to implement. And if they succeed, I then want to do this set of actions and then this one. ACK-NACK, if you've ever done any adaptive development in BizTalk, you'll be familiar with this. But as a pattern, we're just acknowledging that something has succeeded or not acknowledging, so negative acknowledgement. And that is done for you under the covers by BizTalk, but in the tooling, it has to bring it up to the top level. So for example, in a scenario, receiving something from FTP, publishing it to the message box. If that fails, if it can't publish it to the message box, a NACK is sent back. And in BizTalk, that's done for you, and the FTP adapter handles it. In the tooling, you'll see a NACK come back, and then the FTP adapter equivalent, or the connector Logic App, can then decide what to do. And that could mean, for example, if it's deleted the file, undeleting the file. Righty. Understanding the output. So what gets deployed? How much does it cost? When I talk about the common Logic Apps, the structure of a Logic App, we'll talk a little bit about envelopes, the receive adapter, and the send adapter. So I've shown this diagram multiple times before, but remember earlier on I was talking about message bus and system application. So this is the message bus that contains all the core components you need for any integration application. So it's got nothing specific to BizTalk in it. So there's a config store for storing configuration and a routing store for storing routing slips and routing properties. They're effectively just app configuration, Azure app configuration, which is an offering in Azure for storing configuration, key value pairs. An artifact store, which is an integration account. We've got API management, which is used both to decouple the code from the implementation, but also for caching, because APIM has built-in caching. You can back-end it onto Redis if you want to, but that allows the configuration and routing slips and stuff to be cached. Key vaults, storage. There's a logic app called a routing slip router, which calls a function that actually looks at the routing slip and goes, well, where do I go next? And then there's a series of functions as well. In system application, we have Service Bus, which implements our message box as a Service Bus topic. We've got the JSON encode and decode components, flat file decoder, and then things that should look relatively familiar. A topic publisher, publishes to a topic, promoting and demoting content, XML processor, translator, and validate. So all of these are using built-in functionality and logic apps. There are actions for doing XML translation and validation, and they just add stuff around it to handle envelopes and the like. And then there's your actual application that you've converted from an MSI. So you'll get the receive ports and send ports in there. You get a topic subscriber, which is how we kick off either a send port or an orchestration. Any orchestrations will come through as process manager, logic apps, and then you'll get your API connection to support it all.
So Dan, does that mean just on that other slide, previous slide, there's no flat file encoder?
No, there is. I see. Yes, no, there's not. There's a flat file decode, but not a flat file encoder. And the reason for that is that in the original scope, the sort of V0.1 of the tool, the scope included creating a flat file decoder, but not wiring it up. So you have to manually wire it up at the moment. But it wouldn't be difficult to add a flat file encoder in at all, just like it wouldn't be difficult to wire it up if there's demand for that.
Okay, fair enough.
But no, there's no flat file encoder logic at the moment. Alrighty, so how much does it cost? So the tool by default implements the lowest cost SKU. What's SKU stand for? Stock unit? Can't remember. Anyway, the pricing unit.
Stock keeping unit.
Stock keeping unit, thank you. Of Azure resources. So if an Azure resource has a free version, it will use it. Otherwise, it'll use the developer version. And the idea behind that is so that if you did a deploy all and deployed everything up there and then forgot about it, you don't want to find you've suddenly used up, either your monthly allowance or you get a large bill. So integration accounts, it uses the free SKU, app configuration, the free SKU, API management uses the basic SKU, and Service Bus uses the standard SKU. That does mean that there are some limitations there because, for example, the Azure app configuration, you can only have one free SKU per subscription. With an integration account, you can have one free SKU per region, per subscription. So if you already have one of those in your region, the tool will have problems deploying it. It will stop and say, I can't deploy it. And you get this thing that Valerie Robb calls the wall of red, especially with the app configuration because it fails early on. I've written a script that I'm going to put into the tool. So when you run the deploy all, it will check if there's going to be a problem. Do you already have an app configuration? And the answer to what do I do if there's already a free one there is, well, it depends what your free one is. If you're not using it, delete it, run the tool. If you want to use it for the tooling, then you can edit the template files and just use the name of your app configuration. There's some limitations there. If it's in a different region or resource group, you've got to edit quite a few different things. Or you can just change the SKU to use a low-cost SKU. You've got some choice. There is a request to modify the tool so that when you run it, you can supply a list of integration accounts and app configuration and the resource groups and say, I want to use these existing ones because that would be quite useful. One thing to bear in mind is that the deployment scripts aren't designed to be, this is a proper production deployment script. The idea behind it is that if you're in an empty subscription, it will work. If your subscription is not empty, it might not work. The idea was that if you deploy them to an empty subscription and test it all, if you're happy with it, you take those scripts and put them into your own pipeline, whether that's DevOps or GitHub Actions or Terraform or whatever. And also, all the polling defaults 30 seconds. And again, that's a trade-off between latency and cost. So it means that for the file and FTP receive scenarios, they're not instantaneous like they might be in BizTalk. But if you dropped it down to 1 second, it would become instantaneous. But now you're paying for how many seconds in a day? 8,000? No, 86,400, something like that. So you're then paying in pounds. It's like £7 or £8 per adapter. So again, there's a trade-off there in terms of latency and cost that the tool tries to make for you, but you have to decide for yourself what you're willing to do. Right, so there's a whole of common logic apps, and those logic apps are the message constructor. So there's a message constructor which, sorry, I look distracted. I'm in the UK and it's early in the morning and my children are just heading off to school. So I'm just handing them something. Sorry about that. So there's a message constructor which builds an envelope. So given any input, whether it's a flat file or an XML message or whatever, it's going to wrap it in the envelope. And it's equivalent to what BizTalk does as well. It wraps an XLang message around any input you give it. More important than a logic app, because a logic app automatically encodes things in base 64 if it's not JSON. So the tool has to do the same sort of thing. But like an XLang message, the envelope can have multiple parts, multiple body parts, effectively. The routing slip router looks up the next route in the routing slip, gets the address to the route, which is usually a logic app, but doesn't need to be, and then makes a call, his address, okay, to this address, passing in the envelope. The XML message processor is part of a logical XML disassembler. If you've ever looked into the XML disassembler source code, who does this? But I do. It does a lot of different things. So it's promoting the message type, for example, and it also does envelope processing, and then it can do XML validation as well. So in the deployed solution, the XML disassembler component, pipeline component, is broken into separate logic apps. So there's a message processor which handles setting the message type and would handle envelopes if they were supported. A content promoter which promotes context properties. So if you remember, we talked earlier on that there's routing properties. So it looks at your property schemas and creates a list of those, and then will promote any of those that exist in the message. So those two are separated into separate logic apps. There's a topic publisher, which publishes an envelope to the message box, along with any context properties. A topic subscriber that subscribes to an envelope from the message box using a pre-created subscription. And then you get a receive adapter and send adapter. So, file, FTP, HTTP. It's a logic app. It calls the message constructor to build an envelope, and it handles getting an ACK or a NACK. And ditto with the send adapter, a similar sort of thing as well. Right, so the logic app structures, this is, if you can see this is what the logic apps look like. So I don't know whether it looks very different to the types of things that you guys might do when you're doing logic apps as well. But we have this checkpoint pattern being implemented here, which is that every logic app looks similar. So there's a trigger at the beginning, which for most of the core logic apps is an HTTP trigger, setting variables or initializing them. And then every set of actions happens inside these decision shapes. Yeah. And the reason for that is that if you imagine I was building a logic app, myself, and I might have a trigger, and then I've got a set of actions that run. So I'm going to do something. I'm going to call Salesforce, and then I'll check to see, did it succeed, yes or no? And then I'll move down to action 2, which might be, well, now I'm going to update a database. And then I'll go, well, did that succeed, yes or no? And then I might come down to a third action. Now, these are independent steps. Yeah, I could put a scope shape around it to handle it, sure, but that would, there's more work there to work out what happened. And if I want to compensate for a particular step, that's trickier to do after the scope shape. But these are kind of independent steps. And the checkpoint pattern allows us to take each of those and bring them up to the top level. If I, in the logic app, collapse this first action or this first connector where I've got to decide, all this gets collapsed as well and I can't see it. With a checkpoint, what it does is we start with a trigger, and then the checkpoint says, are we in the state to execute this step? So in this case, it would be the checkpoint is empty, that we haven't done any work yet. If so, then off we go, we do our work, and then we set the checkpoint at the end. And that checkpoint might be the call to Salesforce succeeded. Then the next step is completely independent and is at the top level of the logic app again. So we fall through the run afters set up so that after this set of actions, or scope if you like, we drop through to this one. And we go, first of all, is the correct checkpoint set? Is it that we successfully called Salesforce, because if it is, then we'll move on to the next action and set a checkpoint, and so on. And that means that at the bottom, you can have another action or checkpoint, if you like, which is a catch-all. Did anything fail? And then you can handle your processing at that point. So it brings everything up to the top level. And so what that means is, if we go back to that picture of the logic app here, everything is easy to see. So you can see we're going to get configuration, we're going to check the body content, we're going to get the body content, set a message type, and then resolve routing properties in this case here. So these are 5 steps we're going to process. And if this one fails, we skip all of those and drop down to an action down here that handles failure or success. Run through that again. Okay, so envelopes. Similar to an XLS message, everything that is brought in to the logic apps is wrapped in an envelope. So if you imagine you've got a CSV file, so the first thing it's going to do is create an envelope structure, which is a JSON message, and there'll be a header. And in that header, you'll find the routing properties, your context properties, plus some additional message properties like a message ID and tracking ID and all the rest, and content type. And then you have a body. So the body is where we actually have the body of the message, like, for example, the CSV file. So I mentioned earlier that in the header, we'll have properties and state. There'll be routing, which is the promoted properties, and then a routing slip, a copy of the routing slip saying, well, where is this message going to go? And then in the body, we've got parts. So this is similar to BizTalk. So you'll have the content type and the transfer encoding. So remember that Logic Apps works with JSON. So that means even if it's XML, it has to be encoded, because some XML, when you put it inside a JSON message, becomes invalid. So if you had a CSV file, for example, it gets encoded into base 64, and then the content transfer encoding will indicate that it's base 64. The content type will tell us that it's a CSV file, like text/CSV, and then the content, the actual base 64 contents in the content field. So how does a receive adapter work? Well, imagine that the adapter is, say, the FTP adapter. So it's got an API connection where we keep all the the FTP server properties, and the adapter will call the message constructor, which will take the content and wrap it in an envelope. And that's done by calling APIM. So APIM will then call an Azure function that does the actual wrapping. And that Azure function is going to go back to APIM and say, can you get me the routing properties and the routing slip that I need for this message? And a lot of that is going to come from cache. So if it's not in the cache, it goes away to Azure App Config to get it. And then we go to the routing slip router. And now in the envelope, we've got the routing slip. So the routing slip router goes, okay, where's the first route to go to? And the routing slip router will route it off to the next route and update the current route in the message. So inside the envelope is a routing section, and in there is something saying, well, which part of the route are we at? So if I've got 5 steps to run through, and I'm at step 1, and then that is included in the message as it passes through. And so, for example, in this case here, we might go to the XML message processor, which is setting the message type property, context property, and then we might go to content promoter, and then XML translator, and then topic publisher, which is going to publish it to the message box. Now, when the topic publisher is done, it's going to send back an ACK or a NACK to the adapter. And if we have successfully published the message, then the adapter can take action. One of the things people have raised is that in BizTalk, the file and FTP adapters, when they've picked up a file, they can optionally delete the file as well. The Logic Apps output by the tooling don't currently do that, but it is possible to do that. It could be a property turned on that says, well, once we've successfully published the file, let's delete it. And that could also mean that if we fail, we might suspend the message as well. This is suspend queue. Send adapter works in a similar sort of way. I'm going to skip through this quite quickly, so I really want to get to the code. But it's a similar sort of thing. There's a pipeline that we run through, all controlled by this routing slip router, and then an ACK and NACK that goes off. So things you might not know. You don't have to use this tool with BizTalk. At the moment, you kind of do need an MSI in order to run it, but you could just create an empty MSI and just take the output of the tool and deploy it. So the message bus and system application resources can be used to build an integration application, which didn't come from BizTalk. You can set up your own configuration, and there's been talk about writing some open source tooling to help editing the config entries and the routing slip and things like that, because then you could build an integration solution from pieces that are pre-deployed and pre-tested, something similar to, say, the ESB toolkit. And the generated resources give you a good base for creating your own application. You can automate the refresh to the APM cache. Again, this is something I want to get into the tool. I just wrote a logic app that uses the event grid trigger, so that when I update a configuration entry or a routing slip, it will refresh the APM cache. And you can change the route, and I'm going to show this. So I can add in the flat file decoder into an existing pipeline as well. And you can write your own intermediaries, your own logic apps, and stick them in as well. Let's talk about performance. So yeah, performance is relative to your expectations. If you've run the tool and you're used to going into BizTalk and dropping in a file and seeing it, run through, say, a pass-through scenario, you'll see it pop out another second or two later. It's very quick in BizTalk. So you might have an expectation that if you drop in a file to this, it will come out in another second. It doesn't. It generally takes 20 to 30 seconds for the FTP and file adapter scenarios. Why is that? And there's a number of reasons. One is this startup. In Azure, if you certain calls to certain Azure resources incur a startup cost. So inline code, for example, this is about to change, but up until recently, inline code is run by a function app going on underneath that's linked to your integration account, which meant that you paid a sort of a 10 to 20 second startup the first time you tried to run some JavaScript code. Ditto with Azure Functions. Unless you're using a premium SKU, you've got to pay a cost to stand up all the Azure Function infrastructure. Once it's running, it's great. And then ditto with Azure App Config, which is part of the reason APIM uses caching as well. And then again with the integration account, if you're using Transport or Validate. So you might have seen this if you've created a logic app, and the first time you call it, things take longer. Next time you call it, things are great. And there's not much that the tool can do about that, unfortunately. The first one through is going to be a little bit slower than others. You do see this with BizTalk if you're using IIS, and depending on how you configured IIS for auto start and your application pools and things like that. But the other thing is that the warm start is better. So you get down to sort of 20 seconds, but it's not as good as BizTalk. And the reason for that is one, the polling model. So by default, picking up a file is set at 30 seconds. So you're going to be waiting 30 seconds. In fact, it generally is about a minute sometimes for when you pick something up, because if you're not quite on that polling cycle, it can take a little while. I should say it's 30 seconds from the time the trigger has fired on a cold start, 20 seconds on a warm start. But you can be waiting up to a minute for the logic app trigger to fire. That again is to do with the logic app's infrastructure. It's nothing the tool can control. You can set the polling down to 1 second, which makes everything run faster, but costs more. And then there's latency involved with going from a logic app to APIM to a function and things like that can't overlook. Some of this is improved in the dedicated runtime, the one that runs on function apps, and some of it can be improved through code. So one of the things that I looked at doing is, you saw those different logic apps for, say, an XML receive pipeline. You can combine all those into one logic app, and you shave 10 to 15 seconds off. You lose flexibility, but if you're using the XML receive pipeline, why not have it all in one logic app? So again, those are the sorts of things that can be done to improve performance. The one thing to remember, though, is unlike with BizTalk, your latency won't increase as your throughput does. So the classic, performance expectation on BizTalk is I drop one file through and it appears out the other side in a couple of seconds. But if I drop 10,000 files into BizTalk, it's not going to take a second. It's going to take quite a bit longer. And in fact, it could take quite some time. But with logic apps, I drop 10,000 files in. Each one will take about 30 seconds because logic apps, the Azure infrastructure will automatically scale to handle that. And that's one thing to understand as you're moving to the cloud, that you've sometimes got to change your expectations around latency and performance and think about, what's acceptable, not what's the quickest thing for a demo, but what's acceptable to me and my clients and I. Here we go. Yes. What latency can I live with? And what am I willing to pay to get that latency? You can do 1 second latency or 500 millisecond latency, but what are you willing to pay for that? I'll skip through this, but, decrease polling time. Well, one of the ways, I'm sure Dan and Bill are aware of this, but why can't the service bus trigger, for example, use event grid instead of polling? That would make it a lot cheaper. You could use simpler routes, as I talked about, XML receive pipeline, so bring all those logic apps together into one. And you could write a scheduler that kicks each scenario to prevent cold start. And then also looking at stateless logic apps. So this is something in the dedicated runtime, you have the option to use stateless logic apps. And it means the logic apps aren't persisting to storage as much. So the entire end-to-end time to run a logic app is quicker. Right, I'm going to skip over the advanced features and go to a demo of FTP pass-through. Right, so the FTP pass-through, I know this might be quite difficult to read, but the FTP pass-through is running, this is the flow that a logic app runs through, in that, the initial logic app that picks up that the receive adapter that picks up the FTP file is going to call the message constructor. Yeah, and the message constructor is going to go up to APIM and call a function to do the work to build an envelope, and it's going to get the routing slip from APIM, which is either going to be in cache or up in Azure App Config, and it returns that envelope, and then it's going to call the routing slip router, which is a logic app that does the work, and the logic app is going to call a function that finds out what's the next route. And then that function is going to send it to the next route, which will probably be another logic app. And then on it goes. This is the chain. It goes from here, returns back to the routing slip router to find the next place to go. So it's bouncing around all the different places. And then it'll eventually get published to the service bus. So depending on how big your pipeline is, there could be a number of different steps. Now, the tool generates everything here for you. So everything you see here is automatically generated. So APIM, all the functions, everything like that. They're all in either the core message bus resource group, or they're in the system application resource group. Right, let's go and have a look at some of this stuff. So here's the GitHub repo with all the source code. This is the AIM tool repo here. It's got all the documentation on how to run the tool, frequently asked questions, things like that. And issues to do with the tool. If you've got an issue, they will end up inside here as well. In terms of what gets deployed, you'll get a minimum of 3 resource groups. I can make this bigger. I don't know if that's too small. Maybe that's better. We've got the message bus resource group, which, as mentioned, holds all the core stuff. So if we look in here, we've got some. Oh, it doesn't like scrolling. Oh, okay. I shouldn't have made that so big. Righty, so inside here, what we've got is we've got your app configuration, and we've got the integration account. We've got some functions, we've got app insights, key vaults, and some storage. So all the stuff that's not particularly related to BizTalk, but related to integration. Then in a system application, it's mainly logic apps. So inside here, we've got, in my case, there's an on-premises data gateway for connecting, because I'm using the file system connector. We've got content demoter and promoter, and JSON decoder and encoder. The flat file message processor, which is the flat file encoder, the flat file decoder build. So the flat file encoder would go in here as well. Then topic publisher, and then at the bottom here, we've got service bus. There's a service bus namespace, which has got a message bus topic in it. And then you'll see there's a separate resource group for each application. The tooling itself comes with a number of built-in scenarios you can use, and they're documented down inside here. Example scenarios, you'll find there are 4 of them. So there's FTP pass-through, file with XML, which means it's using the so this one's using the pass-through pipeline, this one's using the XML receive pipeline, and XML transmit pipeline, and then this one's using an orchestration, a simple orchestration, and this one with one-way send and receive, and this is a simple orchestration with HTTP adapter request response. So all of those come with the tooling, and you can go into the AIM BizTalk repo and go to scenarios, and you can find them all. So in FTP pass-through, you'll find that you've got a solution for it, and under MSI, you've got the actual MSI. So you can test the tool with these built-in scenarios, or you can deploy them to BizTalk and have a look. So these 3 scenarios here are scenario 1, 2, and 4. So this is scenario 1, this is scenario 4, this is scenario 2, which is the flat file with XML processing. And then I've got one here I've been testing in different webinars and the like. If we look in the FTP pass-through, which is the one we want to test here, there's not a lot in this because these are the things that are specific to your scenario. If you think about from a BizTalk point of view, if I've got a file adapter or an FTP adapter, and then I've got I use a built-in pipeline like the FTP pass-through, sorry, the pass-through receive and the pass-through transmit in my send port, and I'm not using a map, then the only things that are specific to that receive port or receive location are the FTP properties. So the server name, the folder I'm receiving from, the login details, that sort of thing. So they're all inside this resource group. So what we've got is we've got an FTP receive adapter, which is using a specific API connection. And this API connection will have all the details that have come across from your binding file. So the tool will bring across everything that's in the binding file and stick it into either an API connection or into properties in a logic app. The only thing that doesn't come across is sensitive information like passwords and things like that. But everything will come across and be set up automatically. And then you'll have to go through and set your passwords and things like that. But in here, I've got a receive adapter, a send adapter. There's another logic app that you wouldn't see in BizTalk, an equivalent for in BizTalk, because BizTalk hides it from you. But in a send port, if I go and look at the scenario in BizTalk, so I'm sorry, I didn't increase the size of the font here in the BizTalk admin console, but this is the receive location that got migrated across. So it's using the FTP adapter, and it's using the pass-through receive pipeline, and that's it. That's all we're doing. And then there's a send port, and that send port is also using the FTP adapter. Where's that gone? And it's using the pass-through transmit pipeline, but there's no maps or anything on it. And there's a filter set up to say, I want to subscribe to messages that are published from the receive port that I've got. But there's nothing else in there. However, one of the things that BizTalk does for you is that this send port subscribes to those messages. There's a filter on it. So in the deployed scenario, we have to have a logic app using the service bus trigger that is connected to a subscription. And that's handled here. This topic subscriber can then be a piece of common code that we need an instance of this for your scenario, for your send port, connected to a subscription that is for that send port as well, because it's unique to that send port. Just like the FTP send adapter here is unique to your send port as well, because it's using the properties for that send port. They can't be common, if you like. They're deployed from templates, but the actual instance itself can't be common. So you'll always end up with a minimum of 3 logic apps, and then you'll end up with additional logic apps for each of your converted orchestrations. So in this case here, I've got some API connections, and I've got these. So let's have a look at one of these running. The FTP receive adapter logic app looks like this. If I edit here, and we'll see that it will look similar to the overviews I showed you here. So we've got a trigger when a file is added or modified, initializing a number of variables, and then checkpoint steps. And each of these is a decision action, which says, is the checkpoint condition met, which is, in this case here is, are we at the beginning of the logic app? So checkpoint is, the value is null, and then it will run through a series of actions and then set a checkpoint at the end. So they all follow a very similar pattern. One of the interesting things about the file and FTP adapter conversions is that the file system connector and the FTP connector in logic apps don't support file masks. You can look for a particular file, but you can't say I want star.xml or employee star.csv or something. So the way the tooling works is that it's using the trigger that just gets metadata. So a single file has been added or changed. So the trigger gets kicked off saying that we know the file name and the folder and everything like that. And what it does is it will take the mask that we had set in BizTalk, and it is down here in should we process file. What it actually does is it runs some inline JavaScript, and that inline JavaScript creates a regex that implements that file mask. So we check to see, does the file that has been changed match the mask? Because if it doesn't match the mask, we stop processing. So effectively, we skip that file. If it does match the mask, then we move on to getting the actual file. So this is different than, say, BizTalk, where that's done for you in the adapter, so you wouldn't ever see the code. But in this case here, because it's not supported in the connector, it's got to be implemented in an actual logic app. Right. So what I'm going to do now is this logic app is currently disabled, and I'm going to enable it. So now it's enabled. So it means the trigger is going to run, and I've got the trigger running every 10 seconds at the moment. So we should see it. It's just run now, and it's skipped because there's nothing to do. There's no changed file. Because we pulled this across from BizTalk, it's going to be looking for the same file location we were using in BizTalk. And I'm pretty sure in the, oh, I've modified it, so I won't do that. But in the logic app, there is a parameter set. If I go to code view, there's a parameter at the bottom of the logic app, which is the folder that we're looking in. So if we come down to the bottom here, we'll see the FTP receive folder is aim inbound. That's the folder on the FTP server we're attempting to read things from. And we're saying that we're checking every 10 seconds. So that means that on my FTP server, which is also the local box, I can have a look inside the aim inbound folder for a file. So I'm just going to go out to the file store here. Here we are. So this is the FTP server. And the way that the connectors in logic apps are slightly different than adapters, especially file and FTP. But in this case here, what's happening is it's looking for, because the connector in logic apps doesn't delete the file afterwards, it's always set so that it's looking for changes to the file. In BizTalk, you can set a property to say delete the file after I've read it, which means that whenever you drop a file in, it picks it up. In BizTalk, you can then say, well, actually, no, don't delete it, which means BizTalk maintains a list of changes. So it looks at the date time the file was last changed and stores that in SSO, or in the database, I think it actually is, because you can clear that. If you ever had a situation in production where you effectively want to reset that and reprocess files, but you don't want to have to go through and touch all the files, you can clear the list in BizTalk. So this works a similar way. If I edit one of these files, so say, for example, I'm going to edit sample file here, edit that, and I just have to make a small change to it. So I'll change that back to test1, and I'll save it. That's all I have to do to have the FTP connector trigger pick up that file and see it's changed. If I come back through here to the logic app, you'll see that there's a file name mask here. This is what we pulled across from BizTalk, and it's set to star.star. I could directly edit this to, star.csv or something, and then save the logic app, and it would look for those files as well. But at the moment, it's star.star, so whatever is there, it will process. Now, we talked a little bit about performance and latency earlier. This is polling every 10 seconds. So we can see that if we go to trigger history here, it succeeded, and at 9 o'clock, it found a file. And it's in the middle of getting ready to process it. And I don't know why it works this way, but the latency between when the trigger goes, I have found something and I'm ready to execute, and the trigger actually firing in the logic app is around 30 seconds. And I don't get that. I don't understand why that is or how to decrease it. But eventually what we'll find is this will fire. And we'll see that it's starting to process it, and it will pop out the other end. So let's see if it's yet done this. Cool. So now it's fired. And that means if I come back over here to my run history, you see now it's running. So it's now running that logic app. And we can come through here and go into the run history and see exactly what it's doing. So in this case here, it's found the metadata, and we can see the metadata in here. So we can see these are the properties returned by the trigger, and it's found this file, samplefile.xml. And we're going to run down here, and we're going to get the configuration for this step, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and validate we have all the required properties, and then should we process the file. And we can see in here, we've checked the file mask using that inline regex or JavaScript, and then it's popped down here saying success. So we're setting a status code, and then we're moving on. So we're going to construct the message. And you see this took 26 seconds. And this is cold startup because this has to go to APIM, which then goes to app config and has to wait for that to start up because there's nothing in cache. And then it has to go to functions and wait for that to start up. So the first time through takes a while. This drops down to like 1 or 2 seconds after cold startup. But it's going to call the message constructor to build an envelope. And this is actually all the work. Because inside here, the message constructor then calls the routing slip router, and off it goes through your pipeline, ends up being published to the message box. And so when this completes, it means that I've either received an ACK or a NACK because I'm successful. And in fact, we can look at the bottom of this. We can see, well, here's what we're sending in. And then the outputs here, you can see this is an envelope. Remember the envelope structure I showed you earlier. So we can see that we've completed, and this here is an ACK message. If we look at the part type, it's an ACK. And the message here is saying that there's no more routes to process. So it's been all the way through. And then we can see header. We can see all the properties in here to do with the header. So create date, the type of envelope, the message ID. There's a tracking ID and a correlation ID. And that's it. That's all the details. The actual message isn't included because this is an ACK envelope. It's not the actual body of the message or anything. And now it's completed and this logic app is finished. It doesn't need to do anything more. If we look in the folder over here, we should find in the outbound folder, there we go, there's the file. And that will be exactly the same file that came in. So BizTalk 101, we have dropped a file in and it's popped out the other side. And you'll notice that this is GUID.xml because it's respected in the binding that our send port is using, come back up here, it's hard to see, but the send port is using message ID. So it's using macros, assuming everyone here knows BizTalk, but it's using a macro in the send file name. So down here, we've said we want percentage message ID, percentage.xml, and those macros are supported. All of the macros are supported. So it replaces that when it writes the file out with the message ID, which is one of the properties we saw in the envelope. So it's worked all the way through end to end. Now, if I ran this again right now, it would be quicker. It's not going to take as long as it did. We still have that trigger problem where the trigger runs and then you wait a number of seconds before it actually fires.
Where does it keep that file mask or the macro for the file name?
That's in the send port. I'll show you that.
Okay.
That's a good question, Bill. Keep me on my toes. So that was the receive adapter. Let's look at the send adapter. And we can see the send adapter just fired here at, well, for me, it's 9:01 a.m. Yep. And if we actually go into the definition of the logic app, just like the other one, in the properties at the bottom is where you'll find these things. So they're kind of hard coded in the logic app, but you can change them. So here we've got the file send, the FTP send file name. So here we go. There's the macro there. Yeah. And then we've got the folder we're writing out to. And then this is effectively the name of the logic app that we use for looking up config. So when it runs, there's a bit of code that effectively runs an expression that does a string replace and replaces that with a particular value. So that happens as we run. So now, we would look at, yep.
How hard would it be to make up my own?
Your own macro?
Yeah.
Not difficult. You'd need to, you'd have two choices. If it's just for one send adapter that you want to do it, you just edit the logic app and edit that expression. That is being done here and get send file name. So in here, it's going to set the file name variable, and this here, see there's a bit of text here, a list of supported file name macros can be found here. The party macros aren't supported, and there's effectively a great big replace going on here with coalesce. So you could add your own in there. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so you could add your own in there if you wanted to. And in fact, if it was a macro that you wanted to always be available, you could edit the template for this, because this logic app is just a template. If I come through to, it's in the AIM Azure repo.
Mm-hmm. And the reason I'm asking that is that the one customer I've got, they do a lot of BRE to set file names.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So I'm thinking that and most of them are pretty simple.
Yep.
And if I could do macros type thing of that might solve most of my issues with BRE in that case.
Definitely. I mean, here's inside the repo is the template. And in fact, these templates, when you install the tool, these templates are on your machine, and you can just go to the folder and edit these before you run the tool. So you could come down here and find that massive coalesce. I'll be looking for, what is it, message ID. FTP send file names. So I'm going to be looking for, oh, here it is here. So this is the big, long expression that does it all. You could just edit this on your local copy, or you could edit it in your own fork of the GitHub repo. And then every time you run the tool, it will use your updated code here when it creates a send adapter. So, you know, it's fully customizable if you want to do it, but that's how you would do it. And that's a good idea to do that. If you get stuck, let me know.
Yep. Because I mean, that's one of the things, because I mean, almost all of their because what they do is they have one send port that sends 10 different types of files, and they need to specify a different file name for each one of those types of files.
Got it. Yeah.
Like a PO confirmation, an order confirmation, and that's what they're doing it, and they're putting like the order number into that from a promoted property. But so
so that's an interesting one. I wonder, that would actually be an interesting one to do, where you could create, where the tool would support, if it doesn't find an existing macro name, it then looks for a promoted property with the same name and uses that. That would be kind of cool, because that would be a generic one that anyone could use. The other thing too is that you could just edit this and call out to a function to work that out for you as well.
Yeah.
All right. So so the send adapters run, and it's done a very similar thing. It's taken the envelope, it's pulled out the body content, it's had to decode the body content because it's base 64 encoded, and then it sends it out and then sends back an ACK. So that's all done. I'm going to talk quickly about the app config, so the configuration and the routing slip. Because one of the things I want to do next is, if I come back to the presentation here, you've now seen us using the pass-through pipeline. I want to change the configuration, So I've jumped ahead here, but I want to change the configuration. So in app config, if you guys haven't used it, it's key value pairs, and you can use a label to separate things out. And those labels, there's no explanation about how you use them, but for example, you could say, well, I want a value for dev, test, and prod. So if you've got one app config you're using for everything, you can say, in this label, this is the dev value, this is the test value, this is the prod value for a given key. App config also automatically connects to Key Vault, so you can have secrets that you access via app config that are then looked up for Key Vault as well, and you can have different values of those secrets. So if I needed to look up a SAS key or something like that, or an API key for calling APIM, and I had a dev, test, and production version, and the production one needed to be in Key Vault, you can do all that automatically through app config as well. I mean, app config, it's been years in the making. It's a great idea. The way you edit the data is awful. It's a text box. And so try editing your JSON in there. So what I always do is I paste it into Notepad and format it as JSON using the JSON Viewer plugin. If you've got your own text editor, maybe you're on VI or Emacs or something like that, use that. But this is how I do it.
VS Code.
Sorry, VS Code. Yes, use VS Code. There we go. We mentioned earlier on the scenarios. So in the example, the scenario 1, the FTP pass-through, there are 2 scenarios. One is the scenario getting the file and publishing it to the message box. And the other scenario is getting it from the message box and going through the send adapter. And the way they're named is following the naming convention of what we had in BizTalk. So it's the application name in BizTalk, which is AIM FTP pass-through, then the name of the port and the name of the receiver location. If there's any invalid characters, it replaces them with an underscore. And ditto with the sending. So this will be the name of the application, AIM FTP pass-through, and the name of the send port. So that's how we name the scenarios here. And each scenario will be formed of 3 items: a configuration entry, routing properties, and a routing slip. You can change the routing slip and the configuration entries. So The configuration file contains a section for each intermediary, and the intermediary are those logic apps. So the flat file decoder, the JSON encoder, the content promoter. So each section has each intermediary has a section in the configuration file, and what we call properties. So routing properties, for example, are a combination of BizTalk specific properties and properties specific to the intermediary. Yeah. But some values are in the actual logic app. So I showed you that the file mask, for example, the FTP file receive mask and send mask, they're in the logic app as properties in the logic app. And the reason they're properties is that you can edit them in the logic app designer by clicking on the properties button and then modify them. You don't have to find them all the way down in an action. So it's relatively simple to change them. If you change configuration or the routing slip or routing properties in app config, you have to refresh the APIM cache. Remember, APIM, once it's run through one scenario, it will cache the configuration entry for that scenario and the routing slip for that scenario. So if you change it in app config, yep.
So how does it get to app config through API management? Does it go to a function?
Nope, policy. I'll show you that. Just to finish this a little bit off, refreshing the cache, you can do by going to APIM and executing the operation in APIM, and there's a special parameter you can pass on that says clear cache, and it will just clear the cache in APIM. So if I show you that, I'll come back to changing the routing slip. But if we pop out here, I'll show you app config in a second and how difficult it is to edit, because we're going to go through and do that. But if I go through to APIM, here's APIM, and there are 3 APIs in here. Eventually we'll get there. Well, there's more than 3, there's 4 actually. Configuration manager for getting those config entries, the routing manager for routing to the next route. The routing store is getting, it's like the config manager is for getting the routing slip and routing properties and caching them, and then the messaging manager for building envelopes. But the configuration manager, in this case here, there's a get configuration. We'll have to make it slightly bigger. Get configuration will get you all the configuration. Get configuration for step will just get you the configuration for one step, one intermediary, like just give me the configuration for the flat file encoder. Yep. And then there's also things here to support integration accounts. In BizTalk, BizTalk looks up the schema by message type. So if I'm using XML validation or XML disassembler components in BizTalk, and I have an XML message, it works out the message type. And then if I haven't specified the exact schema I want to use in the pipeline, it will look up in BizTalk what's the schema for this message type. An integration account doesn't have that functionality, so the tool has to implement that for you. So what it does is when it uploads all your schemas to your integration account, so say you had 300 schemas in your MSI, it will upload all of those, and it will work out the message type for each one and add that as metadata against the schema. And then what we have here is get schema by message type. We'll go away to the integration account and look up the schema name by your message type value. So it will look for the metadata tag. Yeah. So it does all that for you, and it caches it as well. So again, it's an expensive thing to do, mainly I think because of the authentication. But if we look at get configuration, it's a policy that runs. It doesn't call a function. And oh, I didn't want to go there. I want to go here to the policy. Now this might be quite difficult to see on the screen.
Yep, that's all right.
But effectively, what it's doing is there's a property setting, do we clear the cache or not? And it is doing a call inside here, and it's authenticating using a managed identity. So if you're familiar with managed service identities, it's calling API, it's calling app configuration using the APIM managed identity. And as part of the deployment, it sets all this up so that APIM has a managed identity, and that managed identity has permissions to read from app config. So
I didn't know app config had an HTTP endpoint.
It does, yeah. So app config has a REST endpoint for querying everything. In fact, if you're using functions and you want to use app config, it's well supported because there is there's an SDK for app config that you can add via NuGet. which makes this really easy. And in fact, app
Yep.
config can be accessed either via the management API with this REST endpoint using a system identity in Azure AAD, or you can go to the REST endpoint using the connection string.
Yeah,
and in fact, yeah.
I did a talk last night on the managed identities for the Adelaide group.
Oh, okay.
And
Cool.
showed them how to put the app config into your configuration of your function.
Nice. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Well, there's an interesting bug, if you like, in app config with managed identities, which is that there are two roles, built-in roles, and role-based access control for app config, and one of those is a data reader. So in theory, to read config keys, and the other one is just the reader. But neither of those will work for reading data because you need a permission called list key, which isn't in those. So the only way currently to get data using a managed identity from app config is to set yourself up as a contributor or an owner, which obviously isn't great, or to create a custom role. So what I've done recently is, for another client, I've modified this code so it doesn't use a managed identity anymore and instead goes via the connection string. And it's quite a complex policy because you have to use an HMAC hash and sign the message to generate an authentication key. So you've got to hash part of the message you're sending along with some other information. So it took a while to work that out, but I might look at suggesting to Microsoft that this gets changed because it's in theory not great from a security point of view having APIM having contributor access to your app config because it can change values. You really just want read-only access. But yes, so this is how it does it. So it's doing it via policy here, and there's a lot of exception handling going on here. So it returns the correct fault. Again, there's quite a lot of code going on inside here. Alrighty, so that's how that works. And if we discard out of there, in the definition here, there's a query parameter called clear cache. So if you want to clear the cache, you can just make a call to this, passing true in here, and it will clear the cache.
Okay.
And I wrote a logic app that uses an event grid trigger so that it calls this automatically every time there's a change in app config. And again, that's something I want to get into the tool, so it's automatic. But if we go back to changing app config, if I just finish this last slide here, if you want to change the routing slip, it's similar to a config entry, but you're looking for a routing slip in app config, and you can add or remove entries, and then you've got to update your config to match. If you're adding in a route, so I'm calling the flat file decoder, I need to update the configuration entry as well, and that's what we're going to do now. There's a little demo here of what we're going to do. So I want to take that FTP pass-through scenario and change it so now it does flat file decoding. So if I give it a flat file at the moment, it's just going to pass it through the other end and I'll get a CSV out the other side. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, change the route. So if I come, this is app config. No, it's not. This is APIM. Let's go to app config. So, app config's already here. Right. So this is app config. And the way we edit the values is we go to Configuration Explorer, and we'll see all our scenarios here as keys. And for each of these, we're going to see up to 3 items. Okay, so we'll see the configuration entry, the routing slip, and optionally some routing properties. So this here is the FTP pass-through receive location, and this is the one I want to change. So let's go and look at the routing slip. So we'll go Edit, and this is what I'm talking about. That's what you get for editing your. It's horrible. So I'm going to come out to Notepad, and I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to select it all, and I'm going to format it as JSON. And I'm doing this because I have the JSON viewer in here, and I can go format JSON. So we can see we've got an array going on in here with a list of routes, and it's going to the content promoter and then the topic publisher. This is the pass-through pipeline. Doesn't do anything else.
Yep.
What I can do, sorry?
Yep, that's fine.
What I can do is I can add in a new route. So I can give it a name, and I'm going to call that flat file decoder. And then you can see what's going on in here. The resource ID, first of all, it's saying that this is a logic app that we have to call. It could be service bus, it could be a function app, things like that. It's a generic router. And we give the resource ID. So we give effectively the subscription ID. Now that's blank because it's in the current subscription. then we give the resource group name, and then we give the logic app name. And what the router actually does is it goes away and looks up the callback URL for that. So you don't have to supply any security information or anything like that in your config. It will look up the callback URL, which has a SAS token in it, shared access signature token in it, and then make a call to the trigger of that logic app, passing it the envelope. Yeah. So all I have to do here to call the flat file decoder is change this to the name of the flat file, which I believe is flat file message processor. Oop, like that. I'm just going to double check because I pasted that in over here. Name flat file message processor. Yeah. Okay. So that's all I have to do. And that's it. That's how I change the route. And I can copy that. I don't have to put it all back in one line because app config does that for me. And I can paste that into here. Yeah. And apply. Done. Now, because I've got a logic app running on an event grid trigger looking for these sorts of changes, I can actually come back here, and that's down here, the aim config cache updater, and we'll see that has just triggered. It's just run just now. It's 9:23 a.m. So it's just run and it's cleared the cache. Cool. So now, if I run the scenario again that I ran earlier here, where I'm going to edit, well, I now need to pass in a CSV file because if I pass in the XML, it's going to fail. But if I've got a CSV file and I've got, oh, Bill's retiring. Sorry,
we can only hope.
Yeah. So now I've made a change to the file. The trigger is going to file. It's going to pick up that file and it's going to run. So let's come back to our resource groups and find the, where are we? It's FTP pass-through. So I haven't had to change the logic app at all. I'm just changing configuration. And hopefully this will run. And we've got to wait. So, oh, it's picked it up, but it hasn't yet run the trigger. All right, so in a second, it will run the trigger. This is always fun on a demo.
Yep.
Alrighty, come on. It hasn't run yet. It will in a second. The point is, it's going to run, it's going to fail. And it's going to fail because we updated the routing slip. So now the flat file decoder is being called, but we didn't update the configuration. So the flat file decoder doesn't know what body schema to use or anything. It doesn't know what to do. So it's going to fail. And this is going to show you what happens when something fails. This is fun. This is taking a lot longer than I was expecting. Oh, it's fired now. There we go. So if we come back out, there we go. Now it's running. And what we should see happen when it fails is it will be marked as failed, because the logic app itself, when it's finished, if it gets back a NAC, it will terminate with failure.
Okay.
If it gets back an ACK, it will terminate with success, and that's what sets these values here. So in a second, we should see it's failed. There we go. It's failed. Now, interestingly, when it fails, it actually writes something out to a suspend queue. It writes the actual message out to a suspend queue. Along with an envelope, like a routing failure message. So we can collapse all these and we can see that we got down to construct message and construct message ran. But if we look at what we got out of construct message here, what we actually got is a NAC message with an error. And it's saying there was an error in the flat file message processor. The step that was running at the time was configuration. All these messages include the run ID for that logic app. So you can go to the logic app there with the run ID and see the specific instance that, that failed.
Yep.
It's hard. And the actual error here is no body schema name is set in the configuration entry, which is correct because we didn't update configuration. And so we got a NAC. And then further down here, you'll see it comes down and it's sending the NAC to the suspend queue. In fact, if I go to Service Bus Explorer, and I refresh the suspend queue here, we'll see that in the subscriptions, I should now have, I didn't clear this last night when I was testing. So now I've got 6 messages. Yep, so I can peek those messages and we have, in a second, we'll see that there's actually 3 messages. So this is the actual NAC that we got here. And then what we have, what we also have is the, hold on. which one of these? Here we go. This is the actual metadata we received. Yeah, so this is the metadata from the file, the FTP trigger that we got. So that's the original message that we received that we're putting in. Because if you remember with BizTalk, when we suspend something, we suspend the original message and a failure envelope.
Yep.
Failed routing envelope or whatever it's called. So that the tool does the same thing. Alrighty. So to fix this, all we have to do is come back to app config, go to configuration entry, edit that. In this case here, what we're doing is we'll have to do the same thing where we select it all and format it. We need to add in a section for the flat file decoder. And I happen to know off the top of my head that the only property this needs is the body schema name. It also takes in, a header schema name and whatever other properties the actual action and the logic app supports. So this is called employee FF.
Well, you're missing one E.
I am. Thank you. Glad you're watching. Alrighty, so I'm aware of the time. So let's put that in. We'll apply it. That will automatically update. I'm going to make a change to that CSV file again because Bill has now decided that he actually doesn't want to retire. So we do that. Now, while that's happening and we're waiting for it to pick it up, we can come through to the routing store, which is the integration account, the artifact store, sorry. And in here, I uploaded the flat file, but had that flat file been a schema in my BizTalk application, it would have automatically uploaded it. And in fact, one of the interesting things about this is that if you just want to get hundreds or thousands of schemas and maps uploaded to an integration account, you can use this tool to do it. Because if you bring in that MSI, it will generate all the deployment scripts for deploying them to an integration account. Obviously, if you're using the basic or developer version of integration account, you're limited to the number of schemas and maps you can do. But and there's also a limit on the naming of them as well. They limit you to 80 characters, so that can cause problems. But if we come back now to this logic app, it will hopefully be running. Or very soon it will run. Come on. Well, it's picked it up already. It just hasn't actually picked it up. Again, maybe this is something I need to bring up with the product group. I don't know why this trigger takes so long to actually fire.
Do you have to refresh the cache in API management after that last change?
He's got
automatically.
Oh, that's right. It did it automatically.
Yeah. You would have to do it, but I don't.
He's got a logic app that's doing it.
Yeah. The only reason I haven't got that added into the tooling is because Event Grid requires you to use OAuth. So it's actually it has to use like a service identity or something to connect to Event Grid, and that's tricky to deploy to enable the OAuth. I think the API connection now does support it from ARM or the Azure CLI, because you've got to deploy it and then you've got to enable the OAuth. Do you remember that? You used to have to deploy your API connections from ARM and then you had to go and enable them, like Salesforce, for example. So I was trying to get to a point where it would be completely automatic. So you just deploy and it would just work. I didn't want there to be a manual step. Anyway, that should now have picked up and run. Yeah, and it succeeded. And now, hopefully, in my output bound folder, I have a new file here, and it is, hey, look at that. That's used my flat file schema that I generated in BizTalk, and it's converted my CSV file here to XML. Obviously, it's been a while since I've done a flat file schema, and I didn't tell it to ignore the first row, which had the column headers in it. But here it's here, and those are the details from it. So we've manually edited the configuration and stuck in a new route. So it is definitely possible to do. And some of the ideas that we've suggested to Microsoft is a configuration editor. Imagine being able to graphically change that configuration information and add routes instead of having to edit JSON files. That would be pretty cool. Alrighty, that is pretty much it. So I've just done that demo. And then I had stuff here about getting in contact with me. But
Yep.
what I should do is put a link up to the survey, if I could find it, or maybe you can send it out. Microsoft have a survey. In fact, it's here. If you go to AIM tool, they've got a link to it here. So it's aka.ms BizTalk migration survey is the link, because they want feedback from people. There it is.
Yep.
They want feedback from people on where the tool should go next, and you can use that survey to give them feedback.
Thank you very much for this. I've enjoyed a lot, and I've learned heaps. So thank you very much.
No problem.
Any final comments or anything from you, Dan, or either Dan?
Yes,
either Dan.
Well, I was going to say, just any questions, ping them to me, ping them to Bill. I'm happy to do another session at another time. If we get a lot of questions or people want to see something in particular, if you want me to demo something in particular, I'm happy to do that. We'll just set up another call. So just let Bill or Dan know. But yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity. Dan, any other questions?
No, it's great. Thanks very much for that presentation.